And welcome in to the Nesson Digital Studios. Courtney Cox alongside Pat McAsee. And we did it. We made it through the race. Takuma Sato is the winner of the 101st Indianapolis 500. And it was an intense race. We sat there. We watched it all together. Pat, how did he manage to do it?
He was running strong the entire race. Even when he wasn't up there mixing it up at the front, he was still top 10, top 5. So he was in the hunt the entire time, and he looked strong all weekend, so all he had to do was make that consistency work, have a little bit of luck, which he did.
And he was driving a Honda.
He was.
So we have to talk about that briefly, just because we had 2 engines that went out during the race. We'll talk about who that affected later on in this post-game recap, post-race recap. But for right now, for Honda, is this a tough go, or is it a win, or is it a loss?
Depends how they frame it in the following days. Right now, I think everybody's kind of focused on the failure of it, but I think as the coming days come out, we might hear more about Sato and how he won, and so that might frame it in a different light. But yeah, it doesn't look good for Honda. They had a lot of eyes on them in this, and it was to kind of paint them in a more positive light, and it backfired a little bit.
And what does this mean for Sato moving forward?
I mean, Sato looks like he's comfortable at Andretti. He's been there for about a year now, and I really don't see him making any crazy moves in the near future. He seems able to work with the team, seems comfortable with Honda, weirdly enough. So it doesn't seem like it'll have too big of an impact on him, but this was one that he wanted really badly.
Well, and I thought it was so cute at the end, how excited he was.
Yeah, exactly.
And we both were talking about how many crashes there were, and hearing the crew chief talking to their drivers during it. And I mean, that stuff breaks your heart, and we have to talk about the crashes. I have to throw it out there first. You picked Scott Dixon to win this one.
I did.
This is not the first time that Pat has picked somebody and they've gotten into a wreck.
It is not. Daytona 500. My prediction and Rachel's prediction actually took each other out, so that was interesting.
All right. Well, then this one, you look at this wreck. I was screaming watching it. I thought that looked terrible, horrible. I thought someone might have gotten seriously injured, and they both walked away unscathed. Yeah,
I mean, that's one of those crashes where, even though it's a racetrack, it kind of falls silent for a second while everybody waits to see what happens. But I think that's kind of just a testament to the safety of modern single-seaters, because you look at that accident, and there was a bit of luck involved, because if his car had landed on the wall or the catch fence in a different way, he might not have walked away as well off. But you see the suspension get ripped away, you see like the engine showing, you see everything, but that safety cell around the driver is still intact, and 5 minutes later we see them on camera talking like nothing happened. So that's definitely a positive when you see impacts that hard and drivers walk away almost as if nothing happened. Absolutely. Well, we also have to mention that Sato was picked to win this race by one of our own, yes. Mr. Ben, who you guys saw during the Daytona 500 show. He's also a part of Track Bar, which you can see every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern right here on Nesson Fuel and Nesson. So that will be an exciting thing moving forward. I'm sure he's going to love having the bragging rights on that one. Yeah, he probably won't let us live it down, and unfortunately we don't have another Indy 500 for another year to sort this out. So there's some races coming up that maybe we can beat them. Absolutely, but for me, I thought that I had it. I picked Alonso. He looked good during this race, and then the worst possible thing to happen to the poor guy. Yeah, he comes to the Indianapolis 500 to get away from unreliable Honda engines, and then his race comes to an end because his Honda engine blows. So I don't know. It's a nightmare situation for Honda. Every time you see him talking in F1, it's after a DNF or after he had a practice session cut short with a reliability issue. And it's just constantly, you hear frustration from him over the radio, taking digs at Honda. So this was kind of a way to mend that relationship, and it was seeming to work, but this kind of just made matters worse, because you saw him after the race, and he was noticeably just dejected, and he wanted this because this is kind of his outlet to prove himself while he doesn't have a competitive F1 car, excuse me, and to have it taken away from him when he was running strong on his debut it's got to hurt.
Well, and you could tell that he handled it well.
He did.
Because, like you said, whenever you've seen him after F1 races, he's kind of going off, throwing shade at Honda. This time he was very reserved. And I also thought that his crew chief handled it well. You could hear him talking to him and saying, it was a pleasure to have you on this team. And sorry, man.
Yeah,
was
I know.
The opening line, I'm pretty sure.
Well, because so that's something interesting about it as well, is he had Michael Andretti, who's the CEO of Andretti Autosport, calling strategy for him throughout the race, because that's how big of a deal him coming was. And for Andretti to even partner with McLaren in the first place, given the way that things ended between Michael Andretti and the team when he was a driver in F1 briefly, it was kind of a big deal for him to even warm up to McLaren again. So then for this to happen, he definitely wanted to make sure that Alonso knew that he was feeling for him.
Right. Well, a long race and a lot of takeaways, but when you look back on it, are there any that stand out to you? What were the biggest takeaways of the race today?
I can't get away from just how quickly Alonso got up to speed. I was expecting to see him during the first stint maybe drop back a couple places, or at least hold where he was and try and stick on the leaders so that he could learn a bit, and then once he gets some fresh tires on, gets a bit more fuel, then he'll push and start attacking. But he dropped back to about 9th off the start, and then within 5 laps or so, he was making moves and moving up the field. So he didn't waste any time at all. No,
he didn't. And I thought the best part was everyone noticed how well of a race he had. And when his engine blew and he was getting out of the car, he got a standing ovation.
He did.
I mean, the fans absolutely loved him.
Yeah, I know. And that's not something you see very often, even with big-name drivers such as like Dale Earnhardt Jr. If he gets in a wreck, it's unfortunate, but for him to come over from F1 and do this meant a lot for any race fan. So to see him lose it that way is something that nobody really wanted.
Right, and other drivers really respect him too. The Twitterverse got to see a lot of F1 drivers tweeting out their congratulations for having such a great race, and also, when he was leading, a lot of F1 drivers were pretty fired up. So let's see some of the tweets that we liked during the race. McLaren tweeted out, we'll get to that one in a second, but F1 Nova, Fernando Alonso leads, hashtag F1, hashtag Indy 500. Look at the flow just blowing in the wind.
Yeah, that meme's been making its rounds for a couple of years now, and it's gotten its fair share of use.
Absolutely. And McLaren, let's see what they did. An awesome crowd has gathered in our USA-themed brand Centre in Monaco to cheer on Fernando at the Indy 500 Race of Two Worlds. And that looks like a pretty great crowd, pretty great place to watch a race. You are in Monaco, so I don't think there are necessarily bad places to watch.
It's just unusual to see Frank's mustard in the pits at Monaco.
That's a takeaway from Pat himself. Moving on, Honda Racing F1. It's the lead of the hashtag Indy 500 for Alonso, and the crowd goes wild. Well, they might have tweeted that a little too soon.
A little too early, yeah.
A tough one. James Allen also took to his Twitter, sitting on a delayed BA flight to London with loads of hashtag F1 people, including at McLaren staff, streaming hashtag Indy 500 on phones, 50 laps to go. Lots of hashtags there.
Yeah.
But kind of a cool inside view.
Yeah, it's interesting because the F1 worlds and the IndyCar world don't usually overlap very much. There might be some people working for teams that have experience in both series, but other than that, people tend to not follow them. So it just speaks to how much attention Alonso has brought to this race. Right,
and Indianapolis Motor Speedway took to their Twitter account, the crowd applauds, whose race ends 21 laps too early. That's so sad, but I mean, for the Indy Motor Speedways to tweet something, I mean, even watching at home, you were able to realize how big of a race he had and how much everybody there really appreciated him coming and wants him to come back. And support. It was a very supportive moment, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminded me a lot of Felipe Massa's thing last year when everybody thought it was his last race at Brazil and he got a standing ovation while walking back after a crash.
Now this one was a cool one. Mobile One The Grid took to their Twitter account, and we talked about winners that were F1 champions and then came and won the Indy 500 as well. This says he led more career #Indy 500 laps, 26, than former winners. 2 of them out of the, 5 that we talked about earlier?
Yeah, and again, that speaks volumes because one of the names on there is Graham Hill, and he's the only person to ever take the Triple Crown, which is Alonso's ultimate goal from the Indy 500. So to see that he's already led more laps than Graham Hill, the win will come eventually.
Absolutely. Well, we have another race coming up, too. It's the racing weekend. The Coca-Cola 600 NASCAR. That fires off at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. No one attempting the double here.
No.
Why not?
I think with how tight the NASCAR schedule is now, especially with how demanding the playoff structure is, it's too much to ask to split your focus between 2 series, especially since the cars are just so dramatically different. So jumping between one and the other, there's always going to be a bit of a few laps of learning.
Well, Alonso, F1 under his belt. Indy, we'll probably see him come back to get those last 26 laps that he missed. Is NASCAR his next stop?
I don't know. I don't think he's ever really raced any closed wheel cars. If he did, I don't know if he would have interest in stock cars because they're just such a unique race car. It's such a unique category in the way that racing happens. So you never know, but I think more likely we'd see him go to Le Mans. We'd see him do different sports car racing series, possibly Formula E, who knows. So, I mean, we'll see what the future holds, but he still has a great future in F1. His contract's up at the end of this year, and he'll most likely sign with another team. Absolutely.
Well, we got tweets also just generally during the race. Indianapolis Motor Speedways tweeted out some cool pictures of Zed, who performed during the race, meeting Mario Andretti. This is pretty cool.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know who Zed is, he's an EDM performer. How would you put it? A DJ, kind of?
Yeah.
I mean, the stage looked awesome.
It did.
It looked like a party.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting them to have the show going on during the race.
Absolutely not. And we also had some celebs that showed up. Let's see what we're talking about. Besides Zed, he's a celeb. And there it is.
Oh, which one is this? Oh, yeah. I forgot Jake Gyllenhaal was there.
Yeah.
He got to wave the green flag.
And we didn't know that he was going to be there beforehand. That probably would have been a celebrity that we would have focused on.
Yeah. I was surprised that we didn't hear something about that. Usually the bigger names like that you hear about ahead of time.
And it says, retweet if you're having as good of a time at the Indy 500 as Jake Gyllenhaal. They are looking like they're having a pretty good time. But, I mean, you looked around. Everybody looked like they were having a pretty good time. So
yeah, there were a couple shots where they showed some fans in the infield, and some of them might have been having too good a time, but everybody was enjoying themselves.
Yeah, and then this was pretty interesting. We talked about this during the race. The IndyCar Series tweeted out, the Indy 500 is the #1 trend on Twitter right now, #IndyCar, which is a great thing. We were talking about, can it get back with the fan base like it was, what did you say, 70s, 80s? It was a lot bigger. I mean, if it's trending on Twitter, I know this sounds silly, but when things are trending, it usually means it's going in the right direction.
No, I know. I mean, it seems like we're the generation that's reliant too much on social media, but the fact that it's generating that much attention, not only in the U.S., but around the world, it definitely shows that the series is well respected again.
Right, and then another entertainer, Marshmallow Music, was there as well. This is funny. Everyone has helmets here. It's great. If you follow Marshmallow, you know that you don't know what he looks like. That is what he wears in all the shows. So that's a funny tweet to have out there. Obviously, he had Snapchatted it out. We got a screen grab from that. But that's going to do it for our social media roundup. But you want to make sure that you watch NASCAR tonight. Are you excited for the race?
Yeah, I mean, it should be a good one. It's the longest race on the calendar, so who knows what will happen over 600 miles. We just dealt with 500 today.
Right. and that was insane. Lots of crashes. I don't do well with stuff like that. We were saying a lot of fans go to see the crashes. That doesn't go well with me.
No, it's a
I
little
was not
anxiety
handling
provoking.
that well.
And my thought process after the first one that red flagged it was that if the rain wasn't going to be an issue before, it might have been then, but thankfully it stayed away.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining us for the post-race show of the 101st Indianapolis 500. It was a good time. You want to make sure that you tune in for the NASCAR Coca-Cola 600, which is at 6 o'clock p.m. tonight Eastern Time. We will have you covered on NESSandFuel.com. You want to make sure to tune in there. I'm sure that there'll be a lot of people that are tuning into that one as well.
Yeah, I'd imagine.
Yeah, but for Pat McAfee, I'm Courtney Cox. Thanks so much for tuning in.